The text arrived between helping customers at my boutique. I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've already emptied our joint account, haha. My hands didn't shake as I read it. My voice didn't waver as I helped Mrs. Peterson pick out a scarf. The only sign that my husband of 12 years had just nuked our marriage via text was a slight tightening around my eyes. I waited until Mrs. Peterson left, her purchase wrapped in our signature silver paper, before typing my response. Good luck. My name is Amelia, and at 38, I just received the most callous goodbye in history. But while Ryan was probably gloating over his grand exit, imagining me in tears over his betrayal, I was calmly locking up my boutique for the day. The signs had been there for months. The late nights at work that never matched his pay deposits, the sudden password changes on his phone, the way he'd started going to the gym religiously, buying new clothes, trying to recapture his youth. 3 months ago, I'd found a receipt for dinner for 2 at an expensive restaurant on a night he'd claimed to be working late. That same evening, I'd opened a separate bank account at a different bank. A week later, when he mentioned wanting to combine our accounts to simplify things, I'd agreed cheerfully while moving my personal savings to the new account. The joint account he'd just emptied, it contained exactly enough to keep him from getting suspicious. About 2 months' worth of regular deposits. The rest was safely tucked away, along with detailed records of every suspicious transaction he'd made over the past year. My phone buzzed again. Don't bother begging. Sierra and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later. Melissa. The new receptionist is at his office. I'd met her at the company Christmas party. Watched her laugh too loudly at Mark's jokes. Noticed how she'd touched his arm when she thought no one was looking. She was young enough to be his daughter, naive enough to think she was special. I didn't respond to his text. Instead, I called my lawyer. The one I'd consulted 2 months ago when I'd found the hotel charges on our credit card statement. It's time, I said simply. He just made his move. The papers are ready, she replied. I'll file them first thing tomorrow. Do you want me to have him served in Miami? No rush. Let him think he's won first. Another text from Mark. I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy. My little shop. The successful boutique I'd built from scratch. The one that generated more income than his middle management position. The one whose profits I'd carefully kept separate from our joint finances. I smiled, thinking of the certified letters that would greet him in Miami. Let him enjoy his moment of triumph. I spent that evening in our house, my house, since I'd inherited it from my grandmother and kept it in my name despite Mark's repeated suggestions to add him to the deed. Another lucky instinct that had paid off. While organizing the paperwork my lawyer would need, I found our wedding album. Ryan looked so different then, before his midlife crisis had turned him into a caricature of his former self. These days he wore shirts too tight for his softening middle, tried too hard to connect with the 20-somethings at his office, and used slang that sounded ridiculous coming from a man of 45. My phone kept buzzing with texts from him, each one more condescending than the last. I've been planning this for months. Sierra understands me in ways you never could. You'll be fine. Maybe you'll find someone more your own age. Already told my family. They agree we grew apart. It's nobody's fault, really. I screenshotted each message, adding them to my evidence folder. Let him dig his hole deeper. My lawyer would love his casual admission of premeditation, his gleeful announcement about emptying our account. The last text caught my attention. BTW, I used the joint card to book our flights and hotel. Consider it my parting gift, LOL. Perfect. I called the credit card company. Mrs. Harrison speaking. I need to report fraudulent charges and cancel a card immediately. Of course, ma'am. Can you identify the charges? 2 first-class tickets to Miami were booked today. Hotel charges at the Royal Palm. And I'll need to remove my husband as an authorized user. Do you have documentation of the fraud? Text messages from my husband admitting he used our joint card to book travel with his girlfriend after emptying our bank account. I'll be happy to forward them. The representative's professional tone couldn't quite hide her satisfaction as she canceled the charges. Ryan and Sierra would arrive at the airport tomorrow to find their tickets invalidated. Their hotel reservation was canceled. My phone buzzed again. Don't worry about the house. I'll let you stay there until you find something smaller. I actually laughed out loud at that one. Did he really think he had any claim to my grandmother's house? Had his ego grown so large that he'd forgotten whose name was on the deed? Another buzz. And I know the shop means a lot to you. We can work out a fair payment for your half, of my business. That I'd built myself, funded myself, and grown myself while he complained about my long hours and called it my hobby. I poured a glass of wine, the good stuff I'd been saving for a special occasion. This qualified. Tomorrow Ryan would learn some hard truths about property law and separate assets. But tonight, I'd enjoy the quiet and plan my next chapter. Morning brought a flurry of increasingly angry texts from Mark. What the heck did you do to our credit card? The airline won't honor our tickets. The hotel canceled our reservation. Answer me. I silenced my phone and headed to my boutique. Friday was always our busiest day, and I had a new shipment of designer handbags to unpack. Life goes on even when your husband runs off with a receptionist young enough to be his daughter. Around noon, his mother called. Amelia, dear, Ryan told us everything. About how controlling you've been. How you drove him away. He says you're being vindictive now, causing problems with his travel plans. I put her on speaker while I arranged a window display. Did he mention emptying our joint account and charging tickets for him and his girlfriend on our credit card? Silence. Then, well, he said you left him no choice. That you'd been cold and distant. Margaret, I have his texts. Would you like me to read them to you? The one where he bragged about taking our money? Or maybe the one where he mocked my age? Another pause. He did seem a bit cruel. I told him that text message was inappropriate. I appreciate the call, Margaret. I've always liked you. But I think it's best if we end this conversation now. My lawyer has advised minimal contact with Mark's family during the proceedings. Proceedings? Already? Goodbye, Margaret. By late afternoon, Mark's sister Emily was spreading family gossip through mutual friends. Apparently, Ryan and Sierra were stuck at a budget motel near the airport. Their Miami dreams were temporarily derailed. He'd tried using his personal credit cards, but those had been maxed out for months. Another red flag I'd noticed. My lawyer called with an update. The emergency hearing is scheduled for Monday. Given his admission of emptying the joint account and the documented credit card fraud, we're in a strong position to freeze all remaining assets. Has he been served yet? Not yet. But he'll get the papers at his new motel address. Speaking of which, his girlfriend's social media is providing excellent evidence. She's been posting about their adventure all day, including some choice comments about you. I smiled thinking of my own documentation, a year's worth of suspicious charges, hotel receipts, and text messages that proved premeditation. Ryan had been so focused on his grand escape that he'd never considered I might be watching, waiting, preparing. My phone buzzed with another text. You think you're so smart, but I made copies of all the boutique's financial records. Half that business is mine. I forwarded the text to my lawyer, adding it to the growing file of Mark's mistakes. Let him learn the hard way about separate assets and business ownership. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being prepared. The emergency hearing on Monday was everything I could have hoped for. Ryan showed up in his new young wardrobe, designer jeans too tight for his age, a blazer that screamed midlife crisis. Sierra waited outside, her youth painfully obvious under the harsh courthouse lighting. My lawyer presented our evidence, methodically. Mark's gleeful text about emptying our account, his credit card fraud, and his documented history of hidden expenses. Each piece was carefully collected over months of quiet observation. Your Honor, Mark's hastily hired lawyer attempted, my client admits to some rash decisions, but Mrs. Harrison's actions have been vindictive and calculating. Calculating? My lawyer countered. You mean prudent? My client protected her separate assets and maintained detailed records of her husband's suspicious behavior. That's not vindictive. That's smart business. The judge reviewed my documentation, the separate property deed to the house, the boutique's incorporation papers in my name only, and the careful separation of business and personal finances that Ryan had always complained about. Mr. Harrison, the judge addressed Ryan directly. You admitted via text message to deliberately emptying a joint account and using shared credit cards to fund a trip with your girlfriend. Do you deny this? Ryan shifted uncomfortably. I was just trying to make a clean break. By committing financial fraud? The judge raised an eyebrow. And now you're claiming rights to property that documentation shows is clearly separate from marital assets? The business grew during our marriage. Mark's lawyer tried again. My client is entitled to. The business was established before the marriage, my lawyer interrupted, and Mrs. Harrison maintained strict separation of business and personal finances throughout. We have documentation of every penny invested and earned. I watched Mark's face as reality started sinking in. He thought this would be easy, empty our accounts, run off with his girlfriend, maybe claim half my business in the divorce. He'd never bothered to understand my insistence on keeping things separate, and had mocked my careful bookkeeping as obsessive. The court finds sufficient evidence of financial misconduct, the judge announced. All shared assets are frozen pending final dissolution. Mr. Harrison is ordered to return any funds removed from joint accounts within 24 hours. But that money's gone, Ryan protested. We spent it on. Then I suggest you find a way to replace it. The judge cut him off. And Mr. Harrison, the court takes a very dim view of using shared credit cards to fund adventures with paramours. Outside the courthouse, I heard Sierra asking Ryan about their Miami plans. His response was lost in the sound of my heels clicking confidently across the marble floor, heading back to the business he'd never understood or respected. The next few weeks brought a string of increasingly desperate moves from Mark. He tried claiming the boutique had been his idea. He remembered investing money in it in its early days. He even suggested he'd been my business partner all along, claims quickly disproven by my meticulous records. He's getting desperate, my lawyer observed. His girlfriend's social media shows they're staying at her studio apartment now. Apparently, living on a receptionist's salary isn't quite the glamorous escape he imagined. Mark's family started reaching out, their tone markedly different from their initial accusations. We had no idea, his sister Emily admitted. He told us you'd been cold and controlling, that he needed to escape. But then we saw his texts, the way he bragged about taking your money. That's not the brother I thought I knew. His mother called again, this time in tears. The things he said about your age, about replacing you with someone younger, I raised him better than that. I thought I did anyway. I let their calls go to voicemail. Their support might have meant something weeks ago, but now it felt like rats deserting a sinking ship. The boutique thrived, ironically boosted by local gossip about my situation. Women started coming in specifically to show support, often leaving with far more than they'd planned to buy. My ex tried something similar. One customer confided while buying a designer handbag. Thought he'd take everything in the divorce. Men like that never expect us to be smarter than them. My phone still buzzed occasionally with texts from Mark, his tone swinging between anger and manipulation. You've ruined everything. I never meant to hurt you. You'll regret being so vindictive. Can't we work something out? That business would be nothing without my support. I forwarded each message to my lawyer without responding. Let him dig his hole deeper. Through the grapevine, I heard Sierra was having second thoughts, apparently. Sharing her studio apartment with a middle-aged man who couldn't afford his own place wasn't the romantic adventure she'd imagined. The age gap that had seemed exciting during secret hotel meetings felt different in the harsh light of reality. She posted about toxic relationships and learning from mistakes yesterday, my lawyer mentioned during an update call, and removed her relationship status this morning. I almost felt sorry for Mark. Almost. But then I remembered his, ha-ha, after telling me he'd emptied our account. The casual cruelty of his comments about my age, the way he'd assumed I'd be helpless without him. Instead of pity, I felt something else. Pride in my foresight, in my quiet strength, in my ability to protect myself while he underestimated me. The final divorce hearing painted a very different picture from Mark's imagined triumph. Gone was his cocky attitude, replaced by barely concealed panic. Sierra was noticeably absent. She'd moved on to a CO worker her own age, according to office gossip. Ryan had shown up in his old clothes. The designer wardrobe had apparently returned to help repay the joint account he'd emptied. His lawyer looked tired, probably from trying to find loopholes in my documented separation of assets. Your Honor, Mark's lawyer attempted one last time. Despite the separate property documentation, my client contributed to the growth of his wife's business through moral support. Moral support? My lawyer interrupted. Like these text messages belittling Mrs. Harrison's business as a little shop? Or these social media posts calling it her hobby? The judge had clearly seen enough. The final settlement reflected my careful planning. I kept my house, my business, and my separate assets. Ryango got his personal possessions and his car, which was worth less than he owed on it. "You've destroyed me," he hissed as we left the courthouse. "I'll have to move back in with my parents." "No, Mark, you destroyed yourself. I just made sure you couldn't destroy me too." His mother was waiting outside, ready to drive him to her house, his new home at 45. The irony of his situation wasn't lost on anyone. The man who'd mocked my age was now living in his childhood bedroom while I continued running my successful business. "You planned this all along," he accused. "You knew this would happen." "No, I just paid attention, and unlike you, I understood the value of keeping good records." His mother stepped between us. "That's enough, Mark. You've embarrassed yourself enough already." As they walked away, I heard her start in on him. "Honestly, what were you thinking? A 20-year-old? Emptying bank accounts? Sending those horrible texts?" I watched them disappear into the parking lot, feeling nothing but relief. Ryan had thought he was writing the ending to our story with that cruel text. Instead, he'd merely set my carefully laid plans in motion. My phone buzzed, not with texts from Ryan this time, but with notifications of new orders from my boutique's website. Life was moving forward, just not in the direction he'd imagined. Part 3. Segment 1. 600 words. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my boutique had expanded to a second location. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Ryan struggled to rebuild his life, the little shop he'd dismissed was thriving. I'd hired 3 new employees and launched an online store that was gaining traction nationally. News of Mark's situation trickled back through mutual acquaintances. He'd tried dating apps but found women his age weren't interested in a middle-aged man living with his parents. Younger women, having heard about his history through office gossip, steered clear. Sierra had apparently warned her friends about him, sharing screenshots of his desperate attempts to win her back after she'd left. His career suffered too. The company's HR department had launched an investigation into his relationship with a subordinate, resulting in a formal reprimand. The promotion he'd been expecting went to someone else, someone who didn't have a history of inappropriate relationships with reception staff. He tried to claim age discrimination, Emily told me during an unexpected visit to the boutique. Said they were punishing him for dating someone younger. HR just added that complaint to his file. I was surprised to see his sister in my store, but her presence spoke volumes about how thoroughly Ryan had alienated his own family. "I know we didn't support you at first," she admitted, running her fingers over a silk scarf. "He played the victim so well, but watching how he handled everything, how he acted afterward. I'm ashamed we ever believed him." My lawyer kept me updated on Mark's continued attempts to challenge the divorce settlement. Each petition was denied. His claims of unfair distribution were dismissed, based on the evidence of his own actions. He actually tried arguing that his text about emptying the account was just a joke, she told me, laughing. The judge asked if haha made theft less illegal. The boutique's success brought unexpected validation. Local business magazines wanted to feature my story, not as a scorned wife, but as a savvy businesswoman who'd protected her interests. Young entrepreneurs asked for advice about keeping business and personal finances separate. "The best protection is preparation," I told one young woman who reminded me of Melissa, "and always trust your instincts." Mark's mother called occasionally, usually after he'd done something particularly self-destructive. He'd tried online gambling, hoping for a quick fix to his financial problems. He'd gotten involved with a pyramid scheme that promised fast returns. Each attempt to recover his former lifestyle just dug him deeper into trouble. "I don't know where we went wrong with him," she sighed during one call. "His father and I offered to help him get back on his feet if he'd just take responsibility for his actions. But he's still blaming everyone else. You, Melissa, his company, and the judge." I listened politely but maintained my distance. Their family drama wasn't my problem anymore. My life had moved forward, filled with plans for a third boutique location and a possible expansion into luxury accessories. The only reminder of Mark's impact on my life was a framed screenshot hanging in my office, his final text before I blocked his number. "Have fun with your little shop, at least it'll keep you busy in your old age." Below it sat my latest business award, proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply succeeding on your own terms. 1 year after the divorce, I hosted a grand opening for my third boutique location. The event attracted local media, and the story they wanted to tell wasn't about my failed marriage. It was about a successful businesswoman expanding her brand. Mark's betrayal had become a mere footnote in my success story. During the event, Sierra unexpectedly walked in. She looked younger than ever, or maybe I just felt that much stronger. She shifted uncomfortably, clutching her purse like a shield. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I believed everything he told me about how you were cold and controlling, and how you didn't support his dreams. Then I watched him try the same manipulation tactics on me when things got tough." I continued arranging a display of designer sunglasses. "Those weren't his dreams, Melissa. They were escapes. There's a difference. I know that now." She paused, then added, "He tried to move in when you froze the accounts. Thought my studio apartment would be temporary. After 2 weeks of him complaining about the size of my closet and suggesting I take out a loan for a bigger place, I understood what you meant. About the difference between dreams and escapes. I actually laughed at that. Let me guess, he had big plans but no way to fund them?" "Exactly. Everything was going to work out once his investments paid off, once he got that promotion, once his cryptocurrency definitely increased in value." She shook her head. "I'm dating someone my own age now. We have student loans and a small apartment, but at least we're building something real." After she left, my assistant manager whispered, "Was that the girlfriend?" "No," I replied. "That was just another woman who learned the same lesson I did." Speaking of lessons, I gestured to a young couple examining our designer handbags. "Let's talk about your idea for expanding our accessories line." The boutique had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of independence, of resilience, of the power of preparation. Young entrepreneurs often sought my advice, and I always emphasized the importance of protecting their assets. Mark's mother called one last time, not to discuss Ryan but to thank me. "You taught our family an important lesson," she said, "about enabling bad behavior, about making excuses for cruelty. Mark's still living at home, still blaming everyone else for his problems, but we're not defending him anymore. That's your legacy to our family, showing us the difference between supporting someone and enabling them." I thought about that legacy as I reviewed plans for a 4th location. Ryan had intended to diminish me, to trade me in for a younger model and take half of everything I'd built. Instead, he'd inadvertently pushed me to become even stronger, more successful. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Ryan filed another petition to revisit the settlement. The judge dismissed it immediately and ordered him to pay court costs. "Thought you'd enjoy that." I smiled, thinking of him in his childhood bedroom, still trying to rewrite an ending that had been determined the moment he underestimated me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better. 2 years after Mark's cruel text message, I received an invitation to speak at a women's business conference. The topic wasn't divorce or betrayal, it was about building and protecting a successful business. My story had evolved from a cautionary tale to inspiration. During the Q&A session, a woman asked about keeping business and personal finances separate. "My husband says I'm being paranoid, that marriage means sharing everything." "My ex-husband said the same thing," I replied, "right up until he tried to claim half my business in our divorce." Trust your instincts. Protection isn't paranoia. The boutique chain had grown to 5 locations, each more successful than the last. The little shop Ryan had mocked now employed 30 people and had been featured in several national magazines. Through mutual friends, I heard Ryan had finally moved out of his parents' house into a small apartment above a garage. He'd had to take a lower paying job after his former company downsized, eliminating his position during restructuring. His dating profile still listed him as young at heart, though his profile photo was clearly outdated. Melissa, ironically, had become a regular customer at my original boutique location. She'd earned her business degree and started her own social media consulting company. "You inspired me," she told me once, showing how a woman can build something lasting instead of falling for empty promises. I kept Mark's cruel text message framed in my office, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of how far I'd come. Below it hung a sign that read, "Success is the best revenge." At the 5-year anniversary celebration of my original boutique, I stood addressing my employees and loyal customers. The space had been transformed from a single little shop into the flagship store of a thriving business empire. Mark's mother attended, though I hadn't sent her an invitation. She waited until the crowd thinned to approach me. "I saw Ryan yesterday," she said, smoothing her designer dress, one she'd bought from my store. "He was talking about his glory days, about the life he could have had. He still doesn't understand that he didn't lose everything in the divorce, he threw it away." I thought about that text message, his casual cruelty, his assumption that I would crumble without him, how he'd expected me to beg, to break, to prove him right about my desperation. Instead, I'd built something stronger than before. Each new boutique location was a testament to what women could achieve when they stopped dimming their light for insecure men. The young saleswoman I'd hired last month, coincidentally also named Melissa, came over with a question about the new inventory system I'd implemented. As I explained the process, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the store window. I saw what Ryan had failed to see 5 years ago. Not a woman getting older, but one getting wiser, stronger, more successful. His cruel text message had meant to be an ending. Instead, it had been a beginning. Not just for me, but for every woman who heard my story and realized she deserved better than someone else's midlife crisis. The boutique had grown beyond just a business. It was now a symbol of resilience, independence, and the power of preparation. As I discussed expansion ideas with a young couple browsing handbags, I reflected on how my journey had inspired so many entrepreneurs, teaching them the importance of protecting their assets. Even Mark's mother had reached out one last time, not to defend her son, but to thank me. "You taught our family an important lesson," she admitted, about enabling bad behavior and making excuses for cruelty. Mark's still living at home, still blaming everyone else for his problems, but we're not defending him anymore. That's your legacy. I thought about that as I finalized plans for my 4th boutique location, how Ryan had once tried to break me, to trade me in for someone younger, to take half of what I had built. Instead, his betrayal had pushed me to become stronger, more successful. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Ryan filed another petition to revisit the settlement. The judge dismissed it immediately and ordered him to pay court costs. Thought you'd enjoy that. I smiled, picturing him still in his childhood bedroom, clinging to an ending that had been written the moment he underestimated me. The best revenge was never about getting even, it was about getting better. 2 years after that cruel text, I was invited to speak at a women's business conference. The topic wasn't betrayal or divorce, it was about building and protecting a successful business. My story had evolved from a cautionary tale into an inspiration. During the Q&A session, a woman hesitantly asked, "My husband says I'm paranoid for keeping finances separate. That marriage means sharing everything." I met her gaze and answered without hesitation. "My ex-husband said the same thing, right up until he tried to claim half my business in our divorce. Trust your instincts. Protection isn't paranoia." The audience nodded in understanding, and I knew my words had struck a chord. Meanwhile, my boutique chain had expanded to 5 locations, each thriving beyond expectation. The little shop Ryan had mocked now employed over 30 people and had been featured in several national magazines. Through mutual friends, I heard Ryan had finally moved out of his parents' house into a small apartment above a garage. His once promising career had crumbled after his company downsized, eliminating his position. His dating profile still claimed he was young at heart, though his outdated photo told a different story. Ironically, Melissa, his former mistress, had become a regular customer at my original boutique. She'd gone back to school, earned a business degree, and started her own social media consulting company. "You inspired me," she told me one day. "You showed me that a woman can build something real instead of falling for empty promises." I kept Ryan's cruel text message framed in my office, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of how far I'd come. Below it, a simple sign read, "Success is the best revenge." At the 5-year anniversary of my flagship store, I stood before my employees and customers, looking at how far we had come. This place, once just a dream, was now the heart of a thriving empire. Among the crowd, I spotted Mark's mother. Though I hadn't invited her, she waited until the event had quieted before approaching. "I saw Ryan yesterday," she said, adjusting the designer dress she had purchased from my store. "He was talking about his glory days, about the life he could have had, but he still doesn't understand. He didn't lose everything in the divorce. He threw it away." Her words stayed with me. I thought about that infamous text, the one where Ryan assumed I would crumble, that I would beg, break, and prove him right about my desperation. Instead, I had built something stronger. Every boutique location was proof of what women could achieve when they refused to dim their light for insecure men. As I turned to answer a question from one of my new employees, a young woman coincidentally named Melissa, I caught my reflection in the store's glass window. And for the first time, I truly saw what Ryan had failed to see 5 years ago. Not a woman growing older, but one growing wiser, stronger, more successful. His text had been meant as an ending. Instead, it had become a beginning, not just for me, but for every woman who had heard my story and realized she deserved better than to be someone else's midlife crisis.